Ambassador James Jeffrey, we're pleased that you've joined us in the Cipher Brief studio today. Thank you very much for being here with us, sir.
Thank you for having me on, and hello from Belgrade.
It's been quite a week. It's been quite a month, and frankly, there's been a tremendous amount of unbelievable developments, in the Middle East since we've spoken to you last. I want to start just by asking you, how do you assess the impact in the Middle East of President Trump's most recent plan and discussions on what's happening in Gaza?
You mean we're going to evacuate everybody and rebuild the place?
That's right.
Okay. I would like to make a few points on this. First of all, as he laid it out, and you remember many of his top officials walked it back yesterday. He then doubled down yesterday, but today he said, look, I'm in no rush. First of all, as he laid it out, it is very hard to see how this would be done. Neither U.S. troops nor, frankly, Israeli troops are going to force out 2 million Palestinians from Gaza, who, for reasons that I regret, but are historically hardwired, will not leave the rubble because it is their holy land voluntarily. And that is a given. The second given is nobody is going to take them. The two candidates, Jordan and Egypt, it's not a question of the money and everything else, because, of course, we give both countries considerable aid, and Trump is not, he's a very transactional guy. It is that this would destabilize these countries. That would endanger, first and foremost, Israel's security, and secondly, our own. This is why Prime Minister Netanyahu was quite, I would say, cautious about his endorsement. He had to be careful, but he was cautious. So to the reaction, my experience, and this can be challenged, is that the American foreign policy establishment, for the way we have been formed over the past 50 years, basically going back to Vietnam, are constantly nervous about how we are perceived in the world. Trump is not. That's clear. More importantly, as somebody who is bred on this, I'm not so sure we have to. We don't have to be apologetic about running a global collective security system that, look what it has done to save Israel from an onslaught from the entire Iranian proxy network over the past 16 months. Look what we have done for Ukraine. Look at the alliance system that President Biden somewhat quietly has put together throughout the Far East to support Taiwan and to contain and deter China. We are a tremendous asset to the international community until President Trump indicates that he's going to turn his back on all of this. And frankly, I've been pleasantly surprised at his various comments on Ukraine and his extraordinary engagement in what he called, he was referring to Syria, but he means the whole area, sand and blood. In his first few weeks, his first telephone call was to the Saudi Crown Prince. His first visit was Netanyahu. The Jordanian king is coming next week, and he's all in on all of this stuff. And that's all good. And but the other thing is, people, they don't discount what he's saying, and I'll come to that in a second, but they don't, soft power is overrated. The opinion of the cusp or intellectual coffee houses in Paris on America's world role is overstated in terms of how important it is to us achieving our goals for the American people and for global stability. And as I said, in particular, if Trump says it, they'll say, interesting idea. And look, I'm the guy who was the portfolio manager when Trump sent General Mazloum, the Kurdish SDF leader, and also senior PKK officials' letter to President Erdogan. Erdogan would have gone crazy with anybody else. He kind of shrugged off and said, well, I didn't read it. And 2 days later, he was greeting Vice President Pence for us to all negotiate an agreement that basically is held until the whole Syria thing melted down. The final thing is, and this is where we have to pay attention, what Trump is saying is conventional wisdom says that we have to keep on repeating Groundhog Day, the awful mistakes with the Palestinians right now, those mistakes have led to 46,000 Palestinians and 1,500 Israelis being killed in the total devastation of Gaza. That to be habitable again, tens of billions of dollars of money is going to have to be poured in. And it may not be poured in if we all think that Hamas is going to take over again and do it again when it's built up enough rockets and trained enough terrorists. So what Trump is saying is, let's think of something new. He's put this on the table, and let's see how people react to it. And that is, frankly, a good thing.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsecedge.com.
Do you think, or do you assess that this is going to get the right conversations happening so that we get some different proposals? I know I read a quote from the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, who said President Trump just really wasn't seeing any, to your point, new ideas, any fresh thinking. We've tried everything. It's never worked. It hasn't worked. It's not likely to work, the status quo. What do you think what do you expect to see in terms of some regional proposals, maybe in reaction to President Trump's plan?
We already have it. It's one that I worked on. It's a day after plan that's on the Wilson Center Middle East Program website. We put it up in early 2024. We worked with very senior Israelis, as senior as possible, short of Netanyahu. The Biden administration briefed the incoming team, but most importantly, the Arabs. And the United Arab Emirates has gone forward with a proposal that I won't claim authorship, but it certainly shows a lot of the same ideas. And Trump has basically endorsed it, which we're very happy. It's the idea of an international presence with American leadership, ensuring that Hamas doesn't get back, so it has a security component, and the Biden administration started on that. You'll notice that we have armed private American security contractors working for the U.S. government in Gaza right now, and despite Netanyahu's repeated refusals in principle, we have the Palestinian Authority helping operate the Rafah crossing. So the idea is that the international presence would govern the place for an interim period like we did in Bosnia. That was our example. Ensure that the ceasefire is maintained, that Hamas doesn't get back into power, and there is enough confidence in the international community to put in the tens of billions to rebuild the place, because we're all convinced Hamas will never return. And then you have the larger problem of the Palestinian Authority. You go back to where we are in the West Bank, but that's a hell of a lot better place, the West Bank today than Gaza is. So there is a way forward, and Trump is indicating he wants to help rebuild Gaza. I mean, you notice he actually didn't reject initially U.S. troops. And what he said in the follow-up was, well, we won't use U.S. troops to throw these people out, but we'll see. But right now, his administration, because he owns it now, has U.S. armed contractors who, as we all know, are former U.S. military, usually on the ground in Gaza. And that's a good thing.
Do you think that the reconstruction will be able to move forward if none of the folks from Gaza decide to leave? In other words, there's been some talk about, the idea of Palestinians leaving Gaza, all of them, some of them, or none of them. I think what I hear you say is it's not likely that there are going to be very many, if any, Palestinians that will leave Gaza. How's that going to impact reconstruction going forward? Do you think it can work?
The Germans basically reconstructed their country with U.S. assistance after World War II, as did the Japanese. And I haven't seen the destruction in Gaza. I saw Gaza before it was destructed, and it looked pretty terrible to me. But nothing like what we did to whole cities all over Germany and Japan.
That's a great point. Okay, I'd like to shift to Syria because I know this is an area of particular interest for you. A lot's changed in Syria since we've spoken to you. I don't think anyone could have predicted, or perhaps you did, but certainly most folks I talked to could have predicted what we've seen there. First off, how has your view of U.S. strategic interests in Syria changed since the fall of the Assad regime? Just sort of catch us up as to where you're thinking big picture right now.
The basic goal of the Trump administration, it had several. One was a stable, at peace, unified Syria. And we worked through the UN with that, with a resolution from 2015. Secondly, the defeat of the Islamic State. And thirdly, and most important, because it was the hardest, but the most strategically important, was the elimination of all Iranian proxy presence. That third thing has been achieved. That doesn't mean the Iranians aren't trying to get back in. They are. I've had briefings today on what they're trying to do. And the best way for them to come back in and reverse all of these great steps that have further isolated Hezbollah and reinforced the Israeli and American military victories across the Middle East over the past 15 months will be if Syria is divided, if it is in chaos, and if the various outside forces that are now present, that's us, that's the Turks, that's the Israelis, it's even the Russians, and all but the Russians have their own private armies. The Israelis are a smaller one, but they're working to build it up with the Druze and others. And we and the Turks, of course, have significant military forces that are under our essentially command and control. If that all stays on, that will open the door for Iran coming back in. The interest of everybody, the Turks, Israel, the Arab countries, the U.S., the Europeans, is to not have Iran come back in, and of course, to continue the pressure on the Islamic State. One complication is main partner in putting pressure on the Islamic State up to now has been the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish PKK offshoot in the northeast, and we've essentially created a state within a state. We don't know how to rewind that. I don't think this administration has decided it even has to rewind it. The Biden administration in the last literally days started putting pressure on the Kurds to listen. The Turks are essentially saying, look, you can't keep this thing forever. It's a threat, but right now we want Damascus, that is al-Jalani, al-Shara, and the government, such as it is, to negotiate with the Kurds. That is going on. They've made some progress, but no breakthroughs. So that's something we need to encourage. But we also need to figure out how are we going to defeat ISIS? The Syrian Democratic Forces were doing a counterinsurgency in one area along the Euphrates. They were no longer, as they had been up to 2019, driving against the remaining elements of ISIS. They're now south of the Euphrates, where the SDF doesn't operate.
Do you see any potential near-term changes then to the U.S. presence in Syria? Or do you expect that that's going to remain somewhat stable until perhaps the U.S. has a better idea about what its policy is going to be there?
President Trump 3 times gave the order for troops to be withdrawn. In each case, he was convinced, largely with the Iranian argument, that it was important to keep the troops on, and that nobody else could do that job like we could. The Turks twice offered, and each time it turned out there wasn't much to that offer. So, I think that it's likely, but not for certain, that the troops will stay on. But again, we have to, one thing that this administration, for good reason, is concerned about is never-ending wars. There is no end state to up to now, there hasn't been an end state to the SDF U.S. campaign because, as I said, it was dealing with the symptoms in the northeast of ISIS, not dealing with ISIS. Now there is a government in Damascus who, in theory, we can turn the ISIS prisoners, at least the Syrian ones, over to, that are at Al-Hol and other places in the northeast. And there is a partner in Damascus who, at least in the past in the northwest, has been willing and quite effective in carrying out operations against the Islamic State. So maybe we can get a combination of outside forces, the SDF and the Damascus regime, to actually get into the Badia and finally do in these guys. Their rhetoric and their diplomatic campaign and the reception that they've received everywhere, the EU just lifted or waived their sanctions, has been extraordinary. But that doesn't mean they're really serious about all the things they promised everybody, which is essentially, in many respects, we will look like Denmark. Well, we've had a lot of experience trying to make countries in the Middle East look like Denmark, and we failed every time. We will fail in Syria. The question is, for example, I'll give you the first words out of Tony Blinken's mouth, and I'm sure this administration will repeat them, is inclusiveness. You know, the Ba'ath, the Druze, the Kurds, women, Christians, and those are all important groups. But we did the same thing in Iraq, and I was on the ground doing it. We ensured that the Iraqi cabinet would have people, would be inclusive as hell on paper. In reality, it was a bunch of Shia politicians, more often than not under the thumb of the Iranians, who've been running that country for most of the past 15 years. But some of them have run it smartly, including the current guy, al-Sudani, and they're inclusive in the sense of they sort of leave the other groups alone and kind of work deals with them. Other leaders, I'm thinking of Maliki after 2010, would not do that and was uninclusive in the sense that he abused those people, oppressed them, pushed them away, didn't care what they thought, and used force against them. So in that sense, al-Shara will have a decision. Is he going to be, I mean, he may be normally inclusive and bring in some people, but as I said, don't take that, you know, that's not worth the paper it's written on, because it's likely to be like Iraq. The true measure of inclusiveness is he willing to let other operators operate as long as they don't threaten his regime?
You've mentioned Turkey a few times in this conversation, and I'd like to shift a little bit towards Turkey. What is Turkey's current ability to influence or control the new regime in Syria, and how do you believe that President Erdogan is looking at this situation?
Well, first of all, it's a huge Turkish victory, and it's coming on the back of a whole number of Turkish victories, including playing probably the best strategic role in Ukraine, particularly now that we're presumably getting close to negotiations on Ukraine. So Erdogan is very happy. His economy is doing well. He mended his fences with the Gulf Arabs with the help of a $35 billion investment by the UAE, which had been his biggest critic. And of course, this victory in Syria was in part due to the Turks, including the Turkish forces, the Syrian forces that are under the Turks directly. The Syrian National Army did participate, at least in a supporting role, along with Hayat al-Sham. Now, Hayat al-Sham, which is now essentially the government, and al-Jalani / Shara, they were never really under the Turks' control. It was a little bit, in fact, it was an analogy I made. It's like the SDF and us. It was a marriage of convenience to achieve common goals, but there was tension between them. For example, the Turks put these guys, and still have them, on the terrorist list. But the Turks are working in Damascus with them. But again, this guy is adept at playing everybody. He just hosted the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Bogdanov, in a delegation, including folks that I had dealt with for years, to talk about the Russian bases. I think the red line is they will not deal with Iran, and that's the thing we should hold them to. The Turks also and the Israelis are eyeing each other. You know, you've got three classic nation states and also classic regional military powers in the region, basically. Turkey, Iran, and Israel. And Iran has suddenly been knocked out of the equation, at least for the moment. So the two remaining ones. This is, truism of diplomatic history. By their nature of foreign, security, hard power, you eye the other one suspiciously. And we're seeing a little bit of that, although their interests in Syria largely coincide. Neither wants Iran back, neither wants Daesh to run around. The Turks want the PKK to be dissolved or somehow be less potent. The Israelis like the Kurds, but not enough to really intervene in what's a Turkish interest right next door to Turkey. So I think that there's a way to resolve that potential crisis, but that's on my short list of 10 issues that somebody's going to have to deal with. Now, my vote for who that somebody is, as usual, the United States. Whether Trump wants to play that role, I don't know. But if he doesn't, nobody else will. And this thing will start, you'll start getting slippage at the edges.
How do you predict that the second Trump administration, and particularly the relationship between President Trump and President Erdogan, is going to go this time around?
Well, it was good, but it was both sides were capable of infuriating the other. An innocent President Trump decision not to see a lot of people at the UN General Assembly in September of 2019, and had nothing personal against Erdogan, may have set Erdogan off and led him to tear up an agreement we had just laboriously negotiated. Bolton talks about it in his book, for joint patrols and a withdrawal of the Kurds from the Turkish border, and go in militarily. And that led to, as I said, the Mazloum letter. It led to Pence and the rest of us going out there, and we got it under control. So there is and it was brought under control because both leaders appreciate the other. They value the relationship, and compromises were able to be found that gave the Turks the minimum they wanted, gave Trump the minimum he wanted, and gave the Kurds the minimum they wanted. And that thing is held until today, basically. I mean, with, probably 1,500 people getting killed in shellings and drone attacks and everything. But as you know, in the Middle East, that's often over 5 years a sign of success.
Yeah. You mentioned Turkey's sort of ability to sort of, have conversations and relationships with all different parties. India is in some ways the same way. I'm thinking now in particular as it relates to the sort of desire to be on one side or the other as it relates to defense hardware. India and Turkey have sort of both played Russia on one side, the United States on the other side. With Turkey, it resulted in them being uninvited from the F-35 program. Do you expect that we'll see any changes on defense hardware with Turkey under this new European alignment? There's a lot of focus now on NATO and contributions from European members. There's President Trump, who's definitely signaled to NATO that he expects more from non-U.S. NATO partners. How do you think Turkey is going to be able to navigate that new environment as it relates to defense, hardware procurement, and which side of the scale they're on?
Well, with the Eurofighter, that was a breakthrough because European countries that, partially because of bad things Turkey was doing in the Mediterranean, and partially because of constant Greek and Cypriot pressure through the EU, the EU was European states were reluctant, but that seems to have been broken. The main competition to Erdogan, the main question of Erdogan in the EU has long been Macron, and Macron and Erdogan just had a good conversation. And no, but the F-35 S-400 Russian missile system is a one-off because of, and the technical people have explained it to me, and you have people who know this well, you just can't have the two systems in the same air defense, air control, computer architecture, because there are ways to make the F-35, unstealthy, just like a Serbian captain with 1950s technology figured out how to make an F-117 visible. And you don't want to give the Russians this crucial thing. This is the biggest defense project we've had in 50 years or more. And most of the world has bought in F-35s, even the Germans most recently. I just talked to the Swiss who've looking forward to having them. And so we can't have that happen. And so I don't think there's going to be an F-35 sale to Turkey, despite the money they put into it and we put into the joint program, until they really get rid of the S-400 in a way like it is sold to somebody else and it leaves the country. Turks and Americans have talked 1,000 times about sticking it at Incirlik, putting it under lock and key. The problem is you get another government, or we have a TIFT, and it gets unlocked and it gets plugged in. And if you've already given them the F-35s, it's too late. I've explained this to them, but it's a one-off. Beyond that, you saw how successful we were getting Turkey to change its veto on Sweden, and particularly Sweden, less so Finland, in return for the F-16 sale. So Trump is inheriting a pretty good relationship in terms of point paper of look at all the things we're doing together. What was lacking in the Biden administration was a warm personal relationship between the two leaders. Biden in particular, Erdogan, remember when he first came in, he said, democracies versus autocracies. Well, the list of autocratic leaders he was thinking of was not just Sisi and MBS, and possibly Netanyahu, it was also Erdogan. But Erdogan has stayed on the list while the others have all come off with Biden. But Trump looks at it differently. He's, as you can imagine, not at all troubled by Erdogan's autocratic tendencies.
Is there, and I'm sure there is there anything that I haven't asked that, is interesting that you want to leave us with, top of mind, or what you're going to be looking out for, in the near term?
Personnel and the decisions and actions of this administration in the Near East, beginning back when Trump reached out to the negotiating team on the Lebanon ceasefire, and continuing with the very close coordination between McGurk and Witkoff on the Gaza ceasefire, has been extraordinary and something I don't think any of us expected. Again, this is the blood and sand area. And if the president continues that, given what Bibi Netanyahu, Joe Biden, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and al-Jolani, aka al-Shara, have done in the last year and a half, puts the Middle East in the best position we have seen since, take your pick, the Yom Kippur War of 73 or the Kuwait victory in 91. And so it's ours to lose at this point.
Ambassador James Jeffrey, longtime Cipher Brief expert, we deeply appreciate your perspective, and thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you for having me on. Take care.